The Stanford Football Podcast is back. David Lombardi, RJ Abadia, and Sam Fisher over in the other room. Hey, guys, that was a fun one on Saturday in San Diego, right? We haven't seen offensive play that bad since 2006.
I mean, I hate to quote myself. Actually, that's a lie. I love to quote myself. Not even two in-and-out double-doubles could wash away that performance. It was rough. Signs of improvement, but rough nonetheless.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably pretty well stated. Definitely signs of improvement. And I thought what was so weird about it is it definitely felt like it could be a loss, but it didn't go any of the ways that I actually expected it to go to that loss. It was a very different path than I expected to see.
All right, well, let's break it down. You guys said signs of improvement. I guess, if you look at the running game, Bryce Love, excellent, well over 11 yards a carry. I think he was at 14 for a lot of that game. But the better that the running game was, the more of an indictment of the passing game this was. And let's just get this out of the way right now. Keller Christ threw for 3.2 yards per attempt. I went back and I looked through the numbers of the Jim Harbaugh, David Shaw era, so everything after the dark ages of 2006. That is the worst performance from a Stanford quarterback when it comes to efficiency of the Harbaugh-Shaw era. If you look at the three least efficient performances from a quarterback in the Harbaugh-Shaw era, so this goes from Tavita Pritchard all the way up through Andrew Luck and all the way up to Keller Christ, the owner of the three least efficient performances in that whole era, which has now lasted 10 years, an entire decade, is not Josh Nunez, who a lot of people, I think, would say, oh, Josh Nunez must have the three worst performances. No, it's not. It's not even close, actually. Keller Christ owns the three least efficient performances versus San Diego State at the 3.2 yards per attempt that we saw on Saturday. At Arizona, last year, 3.4 yards per attempt in his first career start. And then versus Oregon State last year at 3.5 yards per attempt. If you'll notice, it's actually trending downward. He posted his worst performance with more experience this week, so that just adds to this whole mess. But in comparison, Josh Nunez at Washington in his worst game was at 4.6 yards per attempt back in 2012. And if you want to compare ratings, Keller Christ's rating of 51.8 versus San Diego State was 30 points worse than Josh Nunez's rating of 81.8 versus Washington in 2012. And I don't want to pile on, but I'm just kind of delivering stats here. Nunez,
you don't want to pile on? Yeah. You don't want to pile on?
I know, I don't. I'm just...
We're past piling on, David. You're curb stomping now. I mean, literally, it's a bloody mess at this point.
But I'm just reciting numbers right now. I'm being honest. I haven't taken a position here. Literally...
Wait. You haven't... Okay, what is your position then? What should Stanford do with its quarterback situation right now? Because literally, you've just you just doused Keller Christ with gasoline and lit him with a torch, which is the numbers. Look, it's not like
I'm reading numbers. I'm being a computer right now.
Right. So now be David Lombardi and tell us what Stanford needs to do.
Okay, one more caveat here because I was trying to be fair to Josh Nunez too. In 2012. Josh Nunez didn't have a running game in that Washington game. Keller Christ at his side had somebody running for 14 yards per carry for most of that game, yet the rating was 30 points worse and the yards per attempt were worse. So even though the counterbalance of the running game has gotten better, Stanford's quarterback play has gotten worse. Okay, so I just laid it out there. Somebody had to do it. I did. I looked up the numbers. Those are the numbers. They're ugly. We get it. I didn't think that Stanford should have ever benched Ryan Burns last year, and I think that the numbers support my case.
Now we're cooking.
Ryan Burns' worst performance in comparison was 5.1 yards per attempt against UCLA, a game that he won last year with a fantastic game-ending drive. And I'll leave you guys with this point and let you guys make your cases. Ryan Burns, I don't think at any point in Keller Christ's career has he looked as good as Ryan Burns did down the stretch against UCLA and when Stanford beat USC last year. I don't think that from the peaks of both players, I don't think that we've seen Stanford quarterback play improve at all for sure. It's certainly gotten worse, but I don't think at any point have we seen it better than it was at its best under Ryan Burns. And we don't want to look at just one player. I think this is a trend. Stanford football has had trouble getting anything out of its quarterback position on a consistent level since Kevin Hogan in 2015, and even that was an outlier after Andrew Luck in 2011.
Sam?
I think that this is a really difficult situation because obviously we can talk about, last year potentially whether or not the move helped. I think also, if you look at the quarterback play, I do agree with you. I don't think we saw anything from Keller Chris the rest of the season that turned it around, but even taking that away, yes, we know the defenses got easier and the opponents got easier, but it could have helped the team move forward from an ugly start last year to have that quarterback change and have a new rallying point. But that's last year. I think this year it has been scary. I think that it has been scary because the defenses that he's gone against, while USC had some talent, when you named the three worst performances from yards per attempt, they were not against some of the best pass defenses in the whole country. They were against Arizona, Oregon State, and San Diego State. And to me, I don't have an answer. I don't have a path forward, and I think that's probably what makes this so scary for the coaching staff is it's hard to imagine switching back to a fifth-year senior right now in Ryan Burns or at some point during the season would do very much for the program, even if it might help a little bit this season. It's hard to know. And obviously, it's hard for us to know with the youth and a guy like KJ Costello if we're anywhere close to that actually being an improvement for the program. So honestly, right now, I see a lot of problems, and I don't really see a path forward. And that gives me the most reservation of all.
Well, okay, so there's two things you need to consider. First of all, you need to ask yourself, what is the best and most productive course for this season? Because there is an extent to which you are obligated to this team, like as the coaches. This is a 2017 team. You've asked them to do all the hitting, all the things they've done over the summer to get ready. You got, 99 other guys in there. You owe them the best possible shot within the course of this season. The other question is, what is best for this program moving beyond this season? Because the belief that Keller Christ is the best option this year must also include the belief that he's probably the best for next year, so that if you start him for the remainder of this season, you are telling everyone he is your best quarterback option for the 2017 season and the 2018 season, because I think, as you said, Sam, to kind of echo your point, they're not going to start him all this year, have him come back next year and yank the job from him. I think we can all agree that's not going to happen. So the question becomes, what are the viable options? Let's set aside what we think they'd be willing to do for a moment. Let's talk about what are the viable options. Number one is seeing what KJ Costello is. And at this point, as someone who was literally asking for that last year, with the understanding that it was never going to happen last year, I really don't see what is to be lost, even by committing a series or 2 series or 3 series to him at some point. Again, if for no other reason that you eliminate him as an option, if you're just convinced that he can't do it and we can see he can't do it, it clarifies the decision at least a little bit.
Yeah, but I think that this is where it gets so tough because I think the coaching staff has a lot of power in terms of how they would evaluate someone like Costello in a vacuum. I think that if you give Costello 2 drives, is he running the plays that he's comfortable with? Is he running an actually new installed game plan because that's what this coaching staff believes needs to be thrown in each week? I think that this is where it gets into a tricky situation where how would he even be judged compared to these other guys, where I think that that's kind of a whole can of worms. I also think that when you look at the difference, I thought you brought up a great question in terms of what's the difference between, the best for the team this season and the best for the program moving forward. I think that this has potentially been ugly enough where you won't even have consensus among the coaching staff, that everyone on the entire coaching staff might not be able to have the luxury of looking at the program as a whole, because obviously David Shaw is safe. He has done so many things over the course of his career. Like, no one's questioning whether David Shaw will be back next year or the year beyond. But there are guys who coach for David Shaw, who are going to be key inputs in these decisions, who might be thinking, if this offense struggles the rest of the year, I might not have a job next year. And that will be a key factor in this decision moving forward. It has to be.
And I think this is where we have to zoom out even a little bit more and not just look at this as a KJ Costello, Ryan Burns, Keller Christ thing, and look at this as a longer-term track record for Stanford as far as how these quarterbacks are coming along. Because, one thing that really opened my eyes to this, and I had been talking about this for a while, but I remember last year when Ryan Burns was struggling against the better defenses on Stanford's schedule, people were all calling for his head on Twitter, and a lot of those calls were in my Twitter mention column, and I got into a few Twitter fights over that, obviously. But
no way.
You sure that was you, David Lombardi, or a different David Lombardi?
So that happened last year. It's fun. I think sports are there to be able to banter about them like we're doing right now. So if you don't engage at all, then that's no fun either. But sometimes those get really frustrating, especially when the very same people who thought that Christ was some kind of savior last year are now calling for Costello over Christ. So that now they're calling for Christ's head. So the same thing is kind of going on repeat. And that makes me zoom out and think, wait, at what point since Andrew Luck has Stanford immediately gotten consistently good quarterback play? The answer is never since Andrew Luck. Andrew Luck here, I'll just go through it right here just so we're accurate here. You have Andrew Luck in 2011, obviously awesome. He leaves with, I think, in one of the greatest performances in Stanford history was that Fiesta Bowl 27 of 31, where the incompletions were 3 throwaways and 1 tipped interception. So he essentially was perfectly accurate. He never messed up in that game. Then you go to 2012. We had the whole Josh Nunez saga there early in the year against Nottingham, all this, all that. Kevin Hogan takes over. Hogan, had a stretch of good play, but that was a team that was obviously run by the best defense in the country in 2012. 2013, Hogan was explosive but erratic, up and down, up and down. 2014 wasn't good at all. That was when Hogan came on in the last 3 games of the year, but the first 9 or 10. Remember the USC game where they only scored 10 points and they should have scored about 50 based on the advanced stats. So let's not even talk about that. 2015 is the one year where Stanford was an elite offense nationally. That happened to be Kevin Hogan's 5th year at Stanford, and he also had Christian McCaffrey. So what I'm getting at here is that was the season where Hogan was a veteran and he was finally able to figure everything out, and finally everything clicked. As soon as he left, it went back to this yo-yoing of quarterbacks in 2016 between Christ and Burns, and now in 2017 it's at all-time lows for this entire era of Stanford football. So out of that whole stretch since Luck has left, you have not had one consistently good year outside of 2015. And in that 15 season, it was a 5th-year senior quarterback. So I think that the development here is an issue. And how can you expect a guy like Costello to step in and be good right away when that simply has not happened in this system since Andrew Luck was the quarterback? It just hasn't happened. So how can you expect it to happen this time?
So I actually think that you can take this back a step even further and take it away from the quarterbacks and just look at the offense. I mean, the defining characteristic of Stanford's offense under Coach Shaw is massive inconsistency and massive swings in performance from year to year. And obviously there's a connection between that and the personnel that they are gaining, maintaining, or losing from year to year. But that being said, Stanford in 2011, we're judging by points per drive, all right? So, yeah, that's an advanced metric, but I don't think it's really that complicated. And it also weeds out garbage drives as well. So you can look at these rankings as pretty legit. In Stanford's first year, Stanford's offense Coach Shaw's first year, Stanford was the 2nd best offense in the country. 2011, that's with Andrew Luck and the whole gang, all right? And then to 2012, first year post-Luck, that ranking dropped to 71st. 2013, it got better. It went from 71st to 30th. 2014, which I think is a year we really need to focus in on at some point, because I think it's very revealing and it's very indicative, because there were so many other variables with these other years. But 2014, the offense got worse again. It went from 30th to 50th in points per drive. Then in 15, when Stanford had a fifth-year quarterback, as David pointed out, and the greatest season in the history of college football from a running back, they shot right back up to being the second best offense in the country. Last year, without Kevin Hogan and with Christian McCaffrey, they fell from second to 62nd. There's just literally no way to defend that body of work and use the word consistency or consistently effective at the same time. So, Sam, just your reaction to that, and where do you think we should go from there?
Yeah, no, I think that it's obviously a really good observation. And it's one of those advanced stats where if you look at the trend that you just described, or if you watched the games, you would agree. Like, it's not like those stats tell a different story than what we've seen with our eyes. They just illuminate what we've seen with our eyes. So I wouldn't call that fluky at all. But it really does call into question a lot about this offense. I think that this offense is a lot like an NFL offense. And I think that it requires a lot of moving pieces to go right all the time. It requires a lot of correct mental decisions. It requires a lot of new plays each week. Well, whether or not it does contain a lot of new plays each week. And even if you have a veteran quarterback, maybe the younger guys elsewhere struggle to pick those new things up. When you have a younger quarterback, maybe he himself struggles to pick a lot of these things up. So I look at that and I think you're right. Like, there has been a tremendous amount of inconsistency, and even within those seasons, week to week, you saw tremendous inconsistency. And I think a lot of that goes back to the game plans were even different week to week. But I think the other thing that really jumps out at me about all of those times is there were a lot of good offensive weapons in the passing game that you've seen even on Sundays being utilized fairly well in the passing game that just were not really well utilized at all by this Stanford offense. And so it makes me wonder, you see all this inconsistency, you see all these issues, and then you see like there really was a fair amount of talent on the offensive side of the ball throughout that time. The dichotomy of that, I think, is really hard.
There probably isn't more talent than there is right now. If you look at the offense, the line is they have these 2 5-star true freshmen starting to play. But if you look at the recruiting profile of the other guys, it hasn't been bad along the offensive line. You have the fastest player in college football in Bryce Love. You have massive targets at receiver and tight end. There's a mismatch everywhere on the field.
Yeah, how can you not find these tight ends? How is the game plan not find the 6'7" tight end when you're having problems with the quarterback?
Yeah,
because that's when you go back to 2012, a year of a lot of inconsistency. The thing that saved Kevin Hogan was Zach Ertz. It was that when no one else was open, when he couldn't find guys deep down the field, even when they were open, he could find Zach Ertz. And I think you look at the tight ends, you look at a guy like J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, and the way he uses his body to wall off defenders, the way he's willing to compete for a jump ball and not allow opponents to get an easy interception, like that's the guy you throw to when you're struggling. You throw to J.J. Arcega-Whiteside.
And you don't have to think
Where's
about
he
it.
been? Where's he been?
It's just pitch and catch kind of at that point, but obviously it's not happening. And another point is, Stanford has had this massive size for a while. We talk about 2012, the size at tight end being the bailout. Well, they've added elite athleticism on top of that. You got, I just mentioned Love being the fastest player, but you have guys like Weddington now. The recruiting, I think, of these, athletes, as you'd put it, has been really good over the past few years. So the cupboard, isn't bare, yet the quarterback play still is leaving, a whole lot to be desired, just to say the least there. And, you were mentioning the complex offense. I think both of you guys were talking about it. That brings me back to, the 2015 point. That's the one year that you had a guy who's just immersed himself throughout his entire Stanford career running the show, and that happened to be the one year that the complex offense ran consistently effectively. And before that, it took Andrew Luck to do it. And I think a lot of the times when you talk to the coaches, they reference Andrew Luck as some kind of benchmark, some kind of milestone. I personally don't think that it's realistic to expect everybody, much less anybody that comes in, to be Andrew Luck. That is a generational player. It may be a once-in-a-program like player for Stanford. So maybe now that you have all that talent, maybe you don't have to be out scheming teams at an Andrew Luck kind of level, and maybe things can be simplified. That's just me.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail right on the head there, Dave. I think that when you look at the way this coaching staff talks about earning an opportunity to play on the field, when you go back to the quarterback competition between Nunes and Nottingham, and then even afterwards in retrospective, when we were talking to Coach Shaw, Kevin Hogan himself, about all the things he needed to do to get on the field, is it right to put up all those barriers to getting on the field? You can look on the flip side. I talked to a guy like David DeCastro, and he was telling me a story about how when one of his teammates, Marquise Pouncey, a few years ago, got hurt and had to miss the season, the guy they brought in as the backup center needed help, and he needed help mentally. And rather than saying, do a better job or we'll find someone who does know what's going on, they asked guys like Dave to help out, make some more of the calls, do some things to make it easier. You look at staffs across the country, when they have to play a true freshman quarterback, they'll make reads on the sideline and relay things in to the quarterback to make the quarterback's job easier, because they've taken some mental responsibility away from a guy who they don't think can handle it, and they still recognize that they want the best that guy can give. And that, I think, is a big issue with this coaching staff, is sometimes you feel like they expect the most from you and aren't always willing to reach out and help when there's not someone in-house who can do everything perfectly.
So there are a couple threads there that I think you brought up, Sam, that are really, really useful. I think number one is the question of evaluation at the quarterback position. Because if you look at how Stanford's recruited, they have been pretty good. We just talked about all the skill position players. We talked about all the offensive line talent. So on the offensive side of the ball, it seems like they've got a pretty good idea of what they're looking for and what's going to translate to the college game. The question happens at quarterback. When you talk about the Kevin Hogan, Josh Nunes, and Nottingham competition, you're talking about a situation where the right answer was their third choice. And we're now looking at a quarterback competition where, at best, I think we'd all agree the right answer is going to be their third choice. Their first choice was Ryan Burns. Their second choice was Keller Christ. And if for the moment you accept the fact that neither of those two are the best option for right now, it means, once again, it's going to be their third choice who wins out. The other thing that you brought up that I thought was a really good point is, if you look at it from just a development point of view, and there we can use like some teaching language, which I think helps, right? There's two things in teaching. There's content and there's pedagogy, right? So there's what you're teaching, and then there's how you're going about teaching it. And if to use a metaphor, if you're driving a car and the only people that can drive it are Andrew Luck and Kevin Hogan in his fifth year, I think it's time to look at either the car or the way you're going about teaching people to drive it.
Here's a question that ties into this game on Saturday, because this is a hot name as far as Stanford recruiting circles have been concerned over the last 5-6 years, and he's coming to Stanford Stadium on Saturday. If Josh Rosen had been offered and committed to Stanford, would he be a successful starting quarterback at Stanford right now?
I don't think there's any way of knowing that.
And that's scary without knowing.
I agree. What I will say is that I have no doubt that he would be better than Ryan Burns and Keller Christ are right now. I believe that whether you want to be super cynical and say, well, he just wouldn't have assimilated anything that Stanford taught him, or they would have wrecked him, or they would have done this, blah, blah, blah. I think that at any given point in either of those three players' careers, Josh Rosen would have been the best player.
Here's just one caveat. With Ryan Burns, triple option guy in high school, that he was a project the whole way. They knew that this guy is going to have to learn. But Keller Christ was the number 2 rated pro-style quarterback in the country coming out of high school with a recruiting profile that was slightly worse than Rosen's, but not in a different ballpark. Both Josh Rosen and Keller Christ were elite high school pro-style recruits coming out of high school. One is now being considered to be the top pick in the NFL draft, and Keller Christ obviously isn't. He's not that guy. That's Rosen. So I'm just throwing 2 out there, and we're wondering about the playbook, digesting all this, and seeing where guys would have ended up. And obviously something that's happening at Stanford isn't quite clicking because they're not turning elite-level quarterback talent coming out of high school into elite-level production in college.
So, again, I think that helps because we're debating the content and the pedagogy, right? We're talking about either what they're teaching or how they're teaching it. My personal opinion is that the what is appropriate. I think power football, the West Coast offense, that philosophy, I think is correct. I don't think Stanford could win impersonating Oregon's offensive philosophy or impersonating some of these other schools' offensive philosophy. So I think they're right to be teaching what they're teaching. My question is how they're going about doing it, because there's a couple things. Number one, there are high school programs out there who are running the West Coast offense, and they're obviously not asking their high schoolers to run it at the same level as their college players do, which tells me that this offense can be scaffolded down. Secondly, if an alien abduction happened today and Burns, Christ, and Costello were not available and they had to throw Davis Mills out on the field, they would have to come up with some version of this offense that they thought gave him the best chance, scaffolded down or whatever.
2012.
And yeah, I mean, isn't that exactly what they did with Kevin Hogan? Isn't that what? And I'll do you one better. You can talk about 2015. The talking point going into the USC road game from the very coaches were, we are simplifying things. We're going to streamline everything, and we're going to make this simple and not get complicated. And it worked. They did a great job. Stanford performed in the Coliseum, and they performed on offense. And Kevin Hogan, I think that was the springboard to one of the best seasons we've ever seen from a Stanford quarterback. So I think there's 2 things. Number one, this is the right offense, but the coaches need to find a way to scaffold this down. And I think Sam talked about a number of ways in which you could do it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really eloquent description of something that we've been fighting with for a long time. It's trying to figure out how to describe this kind of disconnect between what looks like a good system and what seems like it oftentimes to be close. Like oftentimes, like you went back to that 2014 game against USC. That team drove down the field with no problem and then got into the red zone and got into some of the newly installed plays, a little bit more complicated, and just shut down. So I don't think that's an accident. And I think that you could probably, by the way, look at red zone statistics and find a really similar trend to what you've seen, where under Andrew Luck, the touchdown percentage was just simply absurd. And then ever since, it's been pretty tough to finish in the red zone. And as a that's what you would describe out of a non-West Coast offense. Like the non-West Coast offenses are supposed to struggle when you get in the red zone and score in big plays. Stanford was built to score touchdowns in the red zone, but hasn't been scoring touchdowns in the red zone since 2011. And that's a big, big problem. And I think that's one that we often miss. And you look at the game as a whole, but in a lot of these situations, you turn one field goal, cough, into a touchdown, and that changes the whole season if you do that enough times.
Guys, we have about 10 minutes left, so I just wanted to zoom out and make sure that we take a look at how this struggling offense works in conjunction with the larger picture, including the defense for Stanford football as it related to San Diego State, and then quickly moving forward to USC. Obviously, the topic of the week that we had to honestly discuss to maintain our credibility there, though, was the offense. So I think that was a good discussion. And if you view that offense in context of the loss to San Diego State last week, we're talking a lot about the 2012 season and how bad the offense looked under Nunez against Washington. Well, I think that, a huge difference that you have to consider is that the 2012 Stanford offense, even when it was struggling, was backed up by what turned out to be the best defense in the country. And I'm not afraid to say that after watching that defense walk into Autzen Stadium and shut Oregon down possession after possession after possession.
10 straight scoreless possessions. We'll never forget it.
So they held an Oregon team that was averaging 56.3 points per game to 14. Despite the fact that their offense wasn't helping them in that game up until that tying Zach Ertz touchdown, it wasn't happening. So anyway, you've replaced the best defense in the country with what I think could turn out to be a good defense, but a very flawed one. We talked about it last week with the defensive line, being extremely thin and undeveloped for Stanford. They're still a little young. The secondary is great, obviously. The linebackers, who knows? They're going to miss Sean Barton now, possibly for the season. But anyway, you used to have very bad offense with elite defense, and now you have very bad offense with questionable defense, and that's why Stanford is now losing to teams like San Diego State, and that's why this is really scary for them with Josh Rosen coming to town on Saturday.
Yeah, but I think the good news about the defense is it's less of a trend. I don't think this is something that we've seen consistently over the last 5, 6, 7 years. I do think that, yes, it was at its best in 2012 because it was a ridiculously good defense. But I do think Lance Anderson and his staff has found a way in most years to get the most out of whatever he has and patch it together. And I actually was encouraged by the defensive performance against San Diego State. There were a lot of things that you could look at in the negative direction, but that defensive line could not stop dive against USC, and San Diego State can run the football. And that defensive line found a way to be respectable in the running game. Now, they were not great, but they were going against a very good running offense and found a way to get something done that was a big weakness. And to me, yes, there will still be question marks the rest of the year, but most of those will revolve around the fact that the defense has to be great to compensate for the offense, rather than the defense in a vacuum, which I think I was scared about the defense in a vacuum after USC, but they did a lot to alleviate my concerns in that San Diego State game.
Well, the advanced numbers and, again, the simple numbers, the surface numbers back up what you're saying. And the bottom line with San Diego State is Stanford gave up 20 points while being on the field for 40 minutes. And you know what? If you told the Stanford coaches 20 is the number every game, you have to beat 20 points to win, I think Stanford would take that. I also think most coaches in the country would say, okay, we can get to 21 in 9, 10, 11 of our 12 games. We'll absolutely take that bet. They're not dominant. They're not at all. But 20 points is supposed to be enough to win. And the larger trend for me at this point when we're looking at this program is a defensive staff who has consistently done more with less and an offensive staff who has consistently done the exact opposite.
Fire. That's the fire emoji right now. I don't know.
We need the emojis.
Yeah, they don't play on the air. That's the problem.
I can't follow that up with
Can you
anything.
Smell the smoke? I mean, what?
I think that kind of summarizes it, right? It does summarize it.
Two-man defensive line classes, and they still find a way.
Yeah,
right.
I was talking to Lance Anderson the other week, and he said we're going to have to get creative this year, and I think we saw some of that creativity start against San Diego State. They still gave up 184 yards rushing to Rashad Penny, who's an NFL back, but they found a way to bend but not completely break, and even though San Diego State scored that touchdown late, you look at the players that Stanford has on offense, 2 timeouts. All they needed was a field goal to tie. There was still a little bit more than a minute left in the game. That's a totally reasonable situation to put your offense in. That game shouldn't have been over, and they shouldn't have run a give up play on first down. Let's talk about that for a second. I mean, you need a field goal to tie. You have 2 timeouts. And you drop back and you toss it up into double coverage with a quarterback who's been historically inaccurate. Anyway, I thought the defense was done a disservice there. I thought the defense put Stanford in position to at least put that game in overtime, and the offense dropped the ball.
Well, and again, because I know everyone focuses on the end game. It's just human nature. It's just those plays get magnified in your mind. But I would go back to the first half. San Diego State scored two touchdowns. One of them came on a short field at the end of the half because of the offense, on what Coach Shaw has called a mutually flawed moment between him and Keller Christ. It was a bad call, Coach said, and it was a bad choice and throw by Keller Christ. If Stanford just takes 3 knees at that moment, San Diego State has one less touchdown on the board. And so, again, I think you're lowering the bar to a point where you're asking the defense to do things that really shouldn't have to be asked to do, even in years when it's elite.
Reminds me of the 49ers offense, which I now have to cover on Sundays.
Lucky you.
Well, it's funny because Sam and I, when we first started this podcast back in 2012, there were really interesting parallels between the 49ers and Stanford. And Harbaugh was the 49ers coach at the time. They made that quarterback change in the middle of the year, and all this and all that happened. But now the parallels are even more striking. This past weekend was crazy, and I was in San Diego on Saturday and Seattle on Sunday, and both times I saw, the 49ers' defensive effort was probably even better than Stanford's, but it was the same theme. 2 really good defenses that put their teams in position to win the game, and 2 offenses that were so epically bad with the passing game while being explosive with the running game that they played their team out of a win. And I saw the same thing on repeat 2 straight days. It was crazy. So that's where we're at now. What do you guys think is going to happen? This is a week. I don't like to always do these predictions, but to finish up here, this is the most interesting game of the year for me because you're playing Josh Rosen, who is going to be a top 5 pick, barring injury here next year. This is an elite UCLA offense. I mean, we were looking at the numbers earlier. And you have a Stanford team that's at home for the first time this year. Will this be one of those years where they're completely different offensively at home than on the road? I don't know. Playing Rosen, this is kind of a full circle thing after they didn't offer him a few years ago. Plus, UCLA hasn't beaten them in like 8 or 9 straight games. I've lost count. I think they can make it 10 this year, right?
Yeah.
Yep. So it's been 9 straight. So I haven't made my prediction yet. I'm going to listen to you guys baseline off of that. Why don't you go first, RJ?
Well, I think that for me, and I think Sam will kind of echo this a little bit, but one of the things you have to be careful of is the small sample size. And this has a lot of intriguing storylines, some very enticing storylines that I'm really excited to see play out. But I actually don't think this game is that big a deal for Stanford because I think they need to be measured by the body of work, whether that includes 1 quarterback playing the rest of the year, 2 quarterbacks splitting time, 3 quarterbacks. I think you kind of have to stand back and take a look at what they do with their entire body of work. Because, look, they can come out and light up a UCLA pass defense who's in the triple digits right now and tell us that everything is fine. And then they've got to play Arizona State at home. But then you start to get to the reality of the schedule and the tougher teams on the schedule. And so I think it's the body of work. What are they bringing week after week after week? And then let's talk about what it's going to look like. I think Stanford's going to play better in this game. I think they're going to come closer to scoring 30 points in this game than they did against San Diego State. Win-loss, I have no idea. To me, it's about the extent to which they can slow Josh Rosen down and the extent to which they can close that gap in quarterback play.
Come on, put your neck out there. Just give us a score.
No, put your neck out there. You didn't even give us a score.
I'm giving one after you guys.
Well, then that's not putting your neck out there after I've already been run over. Okay, fine. UCLA 31, Stanford 27.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think there's actually a bad score prediction to give in this game because we have no idea what we're going to see on Saturday.
Agree.
There's just so much up in the air. So, I'll give one and not be super afraid. But I really do like a lot of what you just said. I do think that it will be easy to get a little too caught up in this game right away, whether it goes badly or well. I think that if it goes very well, it could be maybe too early to give a sigh of relief. And if it goes badly, it's still 3 games, and it's still, probably one quarterback and one type of the offense. And a lot of young guys on this offense will see their roles expand throughout the year. Offensive line, tight end, wide receiver. You're going to see a lot of these freshmen start to play more and more and grow as the season goes on. So we don't want to judge too early. My question is if the defense does its job, and if the defense slows down Josh Rosen, and if the defense puts the offense in a position to win the game, can the offense do it? That is one question that I do want to see answered this weekend. And I think it's a very tough one to say I'm sure yes or I'm sure no to, because against bad defenses, specifically bad pass defenses, Chris has looked good at times. He has. And, you look at, Rice had an atrocious pass defense, and Stanford was able to kind of do whatever it wanted in that game. And so it is possible we will see it, but I'm not confident right now. And I also think the defense having another injury to Sean Barton and having this lack of confidence in the offense from having watched the game, I think it will be very tough for the defense to hold on if this game isn't a fight all the way. I think that if this game is close in the second and third quarter, the defense will fight and hold on. But if UCLA jumps out to a 2-score lead, what's to stop it from becoming a blowout? Because if I'm a defensive player, I have no trust in this offense to score with UCLA. So I'm going to go UCLA 34, Stanford 24.
All right, both of you guys pick UCLA. I've thought about it while you guys were talking. I think Stanford is going to run this to 10 straight for the same reason that they've beaten UCLA in 9 in a row already. If you look at UCLA, obviously Rosen's great. The offense, passing offense has been elite. I still have questions that their running attack is on the same caliber as the 2 teams that just beat Stanford. I think UCLA has a great running attack. I think San Diego State obviously has that's the strength of their offense. I think that UCLA's strength, which is Rosen, which is the passing game, plays right into Stanford's strength, which is the secondary. If you look at the spread in this game, this really shocked me. I just looked it up right now. Stanford's favored by 7.5 over a possession. And I don't agree. I don't think they're going to cover that spread, but I do think they're going to win this game because I do think that the secondary is going to step up and hold UCLA in the mid-20s. And I do think that after that horrible Bruin defensive performance we saw against Memphis last week, I think that there's just so much talent on this Stanford offense. I think they're going to get one of those Stanford Stadium bounces. They're going to the production's going to go up. We've seen this happen when they're at home a lot in the past. I do think that they're going to score in the 30s in this one. So 34-27 Stanford.
All right. Well, may that be the reality.
Cool. All right, guys. It was a lot of fun. We really, I think, covered the last decade of Stanford football today, but that breakdown just had to be done in one spot there. So I hope that we were fair with it with the numbers, and hope if stats back up what you say, then and I feel that we when you're talking about this and you feel that the stats illustrate what you felt when you watched the game, then it's a relevant stat at least. It may not be 100% contextually accurate all the time, but I feel that we try to do that, try to put it in context and make it relevant. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens from here moving forward. Anyway, thanks to Sam Fisher for joining the show. Thanks to RJ Abadia for sitting right next to me here. I'm David Lombardi, and we'll talk to you next week.